You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, hello, and welcome to Whistleblower Nation here on Revolution Radio. I'm your host, Ella. First off, what is a whistleblower? Well, a whistleblower is a person who makes public disclosures of wrongdoing, corruption, and crime. These courageous people often suffer retaliatory actions because of their disclosures, and I'm here to celebrate these people and give them a platform because shining a light on wrongdoing wherever it occurs plays an important role in keeping society peaceful, free, and just. So today, guys, I have with me Blake Percival, and Blake is a former director of fieldwork services for Western Pennsylvania for the United States Investigative Services, and Percival became a whistleblower after alleging he was terminated from USIS for not ordering his subordinates to submit cases to the U.S. government for payment that had not been completed. He worked for USIS from 2001 to June 2011, when, according to his lawsuit, he was fired after refusing to order his employees to continue an elaborate fraud known as dumping. In July 2011, he filed a whistleblower suit under seal in the U.S. District Court in Montgomery, Alabama. Percival's allegations were investigated by the U.S. Department of Justice, and in October 2013, the DOJ joined Percival's suit and removed the seal. And a little bit about his education. Well, let me go into this a little bit. Eventually, he received a large settlement as a finder's fee, and the case was settled in August of 2015, and he was awarded his settlement in December of 2015. So a little bit about his education now. Percival graduated from Bluefield State College in January 2000 with a Regents Bachelor of Arts degree. He graduated from the West Virginia State Police Academy in April 1994 as part of the 86 Basic Class. This certified him as a police officer in West Virginia. He graduated from Montgomery Police Academy's lateral training class in 1998, and this certified him as a police officer in Alabama. In 2008, he was licensed as a private investigator by the State of Minnesota Board of Private Detective and Protective Agent Services. And in April 2013, he was certified in Alabama as a magistrate by the Alabama Judicial College. So, hi there. Thank you, Blake, for coming to the show.
Thank you, Ella. Thanks for inviting me.
And do you want to add anything to the bio or anything that needs a correction, or you want to add something to it?
No, not as far as the bio goes, but, I think when I start telling my story, I'll back up and cover a little bit of my background just so people understand kind of where I was coming from when I was faced with the ethical question of whistleblowing.
Okay, great. And then, I guess I'm a little curious, like, how you became interested in what made you want to become a police officer, how you became interested in working for the government. And, we have a couple hours, so I'd really like to hear about your life.
All right. Well, here we go. So, my story's actually pretty simple. I was just a guy that was trying to do the best for myself and my family and work my way up. And I guess it all started with, I graduated from high school in Montgomery, Alabama. I had gone to a Christian high school. And after graduating from high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went in the U.S. Army. And I ended up spending 6 years, 1 month, and 11 days in the U.S. Army. But when I went in, I didn't know what job I wanted to do. And I took the test that they have you take called the ASVAB test. And evidently I did pretty good because the recruiter called me in and he offered me a deal. If I would let the U.S. Army pick my job, then the U.S. Army would give me $2,000. And in 1986, $2,000 was a lot more than it is now. So I let them choose my job for me. And that job that they chose was called a 76 Papa, a material control accounting specialist. And I hated it. And I did it for 4 years. And I didn't enjoy it at all. But I'm a firm believer.
What'd you hate about it?
It just numbers. I right. All the way through high school, I hated math. So, to take a test for the federal government and find out that that's one of your skills. Yeah, that was surprising for me. And so I did it for 4 years, and I'm a firm believer that as things happen to us in life, I don't really believe in coincidences, and who would have thought, or who could have imagined how important accounting skills would end up being in my life? Because it appears that knowing how to read a spreadsheet and stuff would end up making me what I'm known for today, a whistleblower. And I'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, after 4 years as basically an accountant in the supply field, I got to do what I wanted to do. I re-enlisted and I became a military policeman. And I just thought it sounded cool. I thought it sounded fun, a much more fun job than sitting behind a desk crunching numbers and counting beans. So I was an MP, and I went overseas with the U.S. Army. And when I came back, I started to school using my GI Bill. And I tested for several different police departments. And I got hired where my wife was from, which was in Beckley, West Virginia. And I went to work for the city of Beckley as a police officer there, and I went to school at night at Bluefield State College. And I worked there for about 5 years, and then I came back to Alabama, which is where I'm from and where I had enlisted in the Army from. And when I came back to Alabama, I was coming for a high school reunion, and while I was here, I put in job resumes with different police departments, and I got hired, and I worked through several different police departments. Each one of them, as I would progress to the next one, I got a progressively better position, better pay, better hours. And so I ended up working for 5 different police departments in Alabama. The last one being Montgomery Police Department, which is the capital city. And I was the court bailiff. I was the guy that stood in front of the court and goes, "Oh, yay, oh, yay, oh, yay, all rise," And so it was a really good job in the criminal justice field for a police officer, because it was Monday through Friday, 7 to 3, just great benefits, secure retirement. But again, I was trying to, continually go up the ladder and make better money and provide better for my family. And anyway, in doing an online search, I was looking for a job that would allow me to use my degree that I had earned at night to progress my career. And I ran across a posting by the United States Office of Personnel Management. And the office within OPM is called the Office of Federal Investigation. So it's USOPM OFI. And so I applied for it. And when they contacted me back, it wasn't a federal agency contacting me back. It was a private company. And that company was U.S. Investigations, which later changed their name to USIS. But anyway, so I was a little blown out of the water when they contacted me back, being that I was working for the government in Alabama for a city, and I thought I was applying to the federal government, and then they contact me back, and it's a private company. And so I asked a bunch of questions and looked into it, and what I came to find was that USIS was created by an act of Congress in 1996. The Clinton Gore administration was attempting to streamline government and downsize, and they privatized the investigations part of the Office of Personnel Management, Office of Federal Investigations. And what this office was tasked with was doing national security background investigations and pre-employment background investigations for anybody that wanted to work for the federal government. So you hear a lot about people that hold a top secret clearance or hold a secret clearance.
Yes, you do.
Well, all those people at that time had their security clearances run through the Office of Personnel Management, and the people doing the investigations were investigators employed by USIS. They were not federal investigators doing the investigation. They were employees of this private company. So I went to work with USIS in January of 2001, and I started as an investigator, and it ended up being a great move for me, and I appeared to be well suited for it. I mean, I had been in the military, I had been a police officer, I had worked in the court system, and if you think about the things that an investigator doing national security background investigations would be doing. Well, they're dealing with the military, they're dealing with the police, they're dealing with the courts, and I had investigative skills. So, I seemed to be a
good fit,
a good match for the job. And anyway, I started in Montgomery, where I was from, and I worked there as an investigator for about 2 years. And then I, again, always reaching for that next rung on the ladder, I applied for a position in management. And the particular job that I applied for was the district manager job, is what it was called. And the office was in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And I would basically be over the state of North Carolina. And the Department of Defense has a lot going on in North Carolina. Fort Bragg, Pope Air Force Base, the Marines have a lot there. And so I would spend a lot of time down in North Carolina, but my office was in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Well, I got the job, and I worked there for a couple years. And near the end of that couple years, the company that I worked for, USIS, went through some changes. They brought in some management from actually GE, and brought in some executives from GE, and they began to change up the structure of the company. And they offered me a lateral transfer back to Montgomery, Alabama. So I moved back to Montgomery, and I was over 23 investigators in central Alabama. And, I worked out of my home, had an encrypted computer, went out and did investigations and gave advice to these other investigators that worked for me.
Can I interject real quick before I did want to ask a question before we move on?
Absolutely.
I'm very curious about what you were doing. Did the USIS, did they have any other responsibilities to the government besides these? Okay, that's what I was curious about.
They did. So the contract that I worked on was doing national security background investigations. They actually ended up with numerous contracts with the U.S. government. There's been something in the news fairly recently about the FBI name check program. Well, at that time, if you called the FBI to do a name check, if you were a police department or if you were checking somebody's background through the FBI, it was USIS doing that.
I see.
If you went to the CIA, the guards that would meet you out front were wearing the fancy blazers. Those were USIS employees. All of our troops going into Kuwait were processed through a facility that USIS. So they had numerous federal contracts. They on the contract that I was working on, not only did they have the investigative contract, but they had the review contract. So after USIS would do their investigations and submit them, it was actually another branch of USIS that was reviewing the investigations. And I think I'll talk more about that in a second. But anyway, so in the progression of my story, I was back in Alabama. And again, I was trying to advance within the company, and I was offered a position over the state of, in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And this was in April of 2007. And it was a district manager position. It was to be over 117 investigators, 5.5 states in the upper Midwest. And let me just tell you, if you want to convince somebody from Alabama to move to Minneapolis, send them there in April. And that's what they did. It was beautiful. Everything was budding out. Nothing was frozen. So, yeah. I did experience that. I ended up being in Minneapolis for about almost 5 years. And I had a great time in Minneapolis, kind of made a name for myself within the company for looking into things and finding a way to advance them, a way to use technology. I was also really good with dealing with the employees because I'd been a hardworking guy all my life, right. and so I could relate to what the employees were telling me, and I saw my role within the company as I'm their supervisor, but it's my job to make things easier for them, move the stumbling blocks out of the way so that they can do their job. And anyway, so I began to be recognized by upper management as somebody that could win employees over and increase morale and do a job even better. Well, in January of 2011, I was contacted by the top of the company, and I was offered the position of Director of Fieldwork Services in Western Pennsylvania. And Western Pennsylvania at that time was where just about all of the security clearances for the U.S. government were processed. The company had two facilities, one in a secure facility underground called Iron Mountain, and then one above ground that was a 40,000 square foot, basically wall-to-wall cubicles. And you had 350 employees in this facility that were receiving these investigations from investigators all over the country. They would review them to make sure that, all the congressional mandates were met, everything was done according to the book. And then they would mark the investigation reviewed and turn it over to the federal government. So, I was told that I was being brought in to streamline the process, improve morale, and it was because, of the things that I had been doing in Minneapolis. So coming into it, this particular facility was having a problem with attrition. They were having problems with employees leaving. And in fact, they were losing 20% of their employees every year to other competitors because by now, USIS was no longer the only company doing these investigations for the government.
And, so they contracted some other companies to do this work.
Correct. Yeah. They had brought in, I think at that point, 3 other companies that were, you could say, competing with USIS, but, the federal government would dole out a percentage of the investigations to everybody that was on the contract. But USIS was still getting by and far the bulk of the work. They were getting probably 60 to 70% of all the federal background investigations at that point.
Do you know, I'm sorry to interrupt again. Do you know
Sure.
how they got this contract with the government? I'm always curious about, there's so many companies that are contracted by the government, and I've always been curious, how do they get these contracts?
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting. Initially, the government, like I said, set them up. So they were handed the contract initially, basically handed the work before they were given a contract. There was a Friday afternoon that everybody that was working for the Office of Federal Investigation was getting laid off. And at the same time they were getting laid off, a retired colonel was coming through, and he had set up the company USIS, and he was coming through giving out job offers. I think 427 people switched from being federal employees on Friday to being employees of USIS on Monday when they came back to work. Worked in the same facility, had the same computers. I mean, it was really a weird switch for a company to basically start up out of the government. Now, at the time that I got the promotion into Western Pennsylvania, they would do rebids. And I think it was every 2 to 4 years, the contract would be rebid. But let's face it, whoever's already doing a federal job as a contractor has a leg up on everybody else because the government's already seen their work. They already know if they're happy with them, and they already know if they can do the work. So USIS was having no trouble getting the rebid, and the government was trying to, spread the wealth, make it more fair, have more competition in this particular area. And they were bringing in other companies, and they had brought in, I think, 3 at the time. So, coming in and knowing that they had these problems with employees leaving, the first thing I hadn't thought I needed to do was talk with the employees and find out what they liked and what they didn't like about the company, the job, and hear from them. And in my experience, that had been the best way to jump into it. So what I started doing was having small meetings. And I would, sometimes it would be me and 2 or 3 employees. Sometimes it would be me and 10 employees. But in a facility of 350 people, I'd get, different groups of employees, and I would basically pose 2 questions to them. What do you like about your job? What do you hate about your job? And when I would ask, what do you like about your job? I wasn't surprised by the answer. It was the answer that you would hear if you asked, any of the other 10,000 employees that by this time worked for this company. And it was, I like that we're a line of defense for the United States government. I like that we have an impact on our country's national security. And you could metaphorically see them taking out their American flag and waving it. And I related to it. I felt the same way. And, when I would ask, what do you hate about your job? I was getting, I don't mean to belittle what was being said, but I wasn't getting anything that really concerned me. I was getting things that I could address, that I could take care of, and that I could move out of the way if it was a stumbling block for the employees. It was stuff like, I don't like that the carpets, in this facility are filthy, and they were. There's a lot of snow in Western Pennsylvania, and this facility was carpeted, and I thought the carpet was black. So we bought a carpet cleaner and had the maintenance guys, clean it, and lo and behold, it was blue. So that's one of the concerns that came up from the employees. But that, if that's why people are leaving, or if that's one of the things that makes them not happy, hey, it was easy to fix. And, and there were other easy fixes like that. And I had probably been having these meetings for a couple weeks, and it got to where that I was having the meeting with the 2 people that reported directly to me, because I was the senior person in this facility. And the 2 people that reported to me were the managers when I was not in the facility. And so I had them in my office, and I asked the same 2 questions. What do you like about your job? What do you hate about your job? And to what do you like, I got the same thing that I had been getting from everybody else, and it didn't surprise me. But when I asked, what do you hate about your job? One of the 2 managers blurted out, I hate that we have this process called dumping. And, I didn't know what dumping was. My career had been in investigations. To be quite honest, I knew, just a little bit about the way they actually reviewed the cases within this facility. I was still learning that. And I had no idea what dumping was. So I asked her to explain it to me. And she did. She explained to me the process known as dumping. And I'll try to explain it without getting too technical. So, as I said earlier, this company had been sold several times through the years. It originally, was started as an employee stock ownership company, came out of the federal roots, and it had sold 3 times by the time we're talking about in 2011. And each time a company sells, the people that are investing in it, they expect a return on their money. And the company had brought in management, from outside, and it was really taking on a feel of corporate America rather than a federal agency, which is what it had started as and what it had operated as for years. So, the company would set, the corporate leadership would set earnings projections. All companies do it. But in this instance, this company knew what they delivered to the U.S. government was investigations, and they knew exactly what they got paid for each investigations, and there was a dollar amount on each one of those investigations. And so they came up with a scheme called dumping, to where near the end of the month, they would just send that number of investigations that they needed to send to make X amount of dollars, which was what had been projected that they needed to make that month. And so what dumping was giving the government investigations that, some of them may have been partially investigated. Some of them weren't investigated at all. And
what were you thinking? Like when she told you about the dumping and how she didn't like it, what went through your head?
Initially, almost a disbelief. I mean, I had the same little metaphoric American flag about this company. I was blown away. I could not believe that this company that I had poured myself into was all about the money. And that's what it came down to, was that this company was willing to risk the safety of everybody in the United States. And the safety of our republic in a whole.
And the government
for the dollar.
I'm sorry again, I didn't mean to step
No,
on you.
that's fine.
In the government, there was no oversight from the government. They weren't really checking in detail, or is it because they're contractors? Because I remember in the 80s when Reagan did that, kind of created all these, contractors instead of agencies. Is that what the issue was?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I kind of touched on it, but I didn't explain it well enough. So the way that this company came into being, and then the way that they had multiple contracts, almost created an incestuous, and I hope that word doesn't disturb everybody, but almost an incestuous relationship with the government. In other words, USIS, like I said earlier, not only did the investigations, but then when they delivered them to the government, the people that were supposed to be government employees checking them were actually USIS employees. They were not federal employees, because they had another contract doing that. Also, if you think about the management at the Office of Federal Investigation, where better to get them than the company that was created out of the Office of Federal Investigation and had been sitting there doing investigations for 15 years. So when the Office of Federal Investigation wanted somebody for senior management, they seemed to pick them right out of USIS. So again, the employees over at the Office of Personnel Management that were supposed to be checking on USIS, 99% of them had worked at USIS. And there were employees at USIS that had been management at OPM. So that was, all of that kind of mixed together, not to mention this was in western Pennsylvania, which is rural America. It's Grove City, Butler, Pennsylvania. It's small town America, and all these people knew each other. And, so the people overseeing USIS and the people that worked at USIS, they were neighbors, they were friends, they were buddies. So, I think all of that went into why USIS thought they could do this and why they did get away with it for years. Did that answer your question?
It did. It absolutely did. So
Okay.
that had been going on for years and years, I guess, and they'd been getting away with it.
Yeah, and I didn't know how long it had been going on when she told me about it. And so when she told me about it, I looked her square in the eye and I said, "We don't dump. If anybody else tells you to dump, direct them to me." Well, I thought I had stopped the process, and I had temporarily stopped the process, and I went on with trying to correct all the stuff that needed to be corrected within this organization. But that decision to stop the dumping process put me on a collision course with management, and I began to get direct orders to dump.
Well, because you're a man of integrity, you did the right thing, and you explained to your subordinates that they'd be doing their job correct from that point on. How did your employees respond to that request?
Initially, they were all with me. And I think they started to feel that we were pulling out of this thing that they didn't like. Keep in mind, not everybody within this facility knew what was going on. It was just a handful of people that were doing the dirty work.
I see.
And so, I stopped the process. Of course, upper management did not like that, and by May of 2011, they were firing me. They sent a guy to town, and he came in and talked to me and told me basically that I was no longer needed, and that my management style wasn't working out.
What were you thinking then when you heard that?
Oh, I knew exactly. I knew
why.
exactly what was going on. So, they treated me like a criminal. I held a top secret government clearance. I had a federal badge and credential that identified me as a federal investigator. They took that from me. They walked me out of this facility like I was a criminal. And I found myself in one day going from making six figures with a $20,000 a year bonus, a corporate SUV, a corporate BlackBerry, a direct bill American Express credit card, living in a corporate apartment because I still had a home in Minneapolis. I found myself in one day going from that to unemployed and not knowing where my next paycheck was coming from. So they walked me out and they offered me a severance package. They handed me a severance package and they were offering me $42,000 to just, sign accepting the severance package and go about my way.
But you weren't allowed to talk to anybody about it, I'm sure. If you took it. Yeah. That's
right. I was pretty familiar with legal stuff, and I know that when you look at a legal document and there's something printed so small that you can just barely read it, I call that legalese. And they do that because they don't want you to read it. And there was legalese on this paperwork, and it said if you sign this, you give up your rights to file a whistleblower claim. And I first off, I couldn't believe they put that in my severance package. So, I was in a quandary. I don't know where my next paycheck's coming from. I'm in Pennsylvania, and I own a home in Minnesota that's on the market to be sold. What do you do? And so, I after thinking about it briefly, called a friend of mine who was a lawyer in Alabama, and I had met him when I was the bailiff. He was the prosecutor in Montgomery, Alabama, and I called him and I was like, here's what's going on. And they gave me this severance package. Would you mind looking at the severance package? And he said, yeah, fax it over to me. So I faxed him the severance package, and he called me almost immediately and said, why in the world does it have a whistleblower clause in here? And I said, well, here's what's been going on at this company. And I told him. And I started telling him, and he stopped me. And he said, don't say anything else. Protect your family. Get your family and get out of there as quickly as you can. Don't sign anything. And so I did that. And so, we were leaving Pennsylvania in May of 2011. So not even 4 months after I had gotten this huge promotion that was supposed to lead, to retirement and had been the ultimate step up, we were limping out of Western Pennsylvania. I mean, I left there in a U-Haul truck, and anyway, I didn't want to go back to Minnesota because the only reason I had gone to Minnesota was for my employment with U.S. Investigations. So we actually moved back to Montgomery, where I was from, and we moved into my mom's house, and we actually set up our bedroom furniture in my mother's living room.
Wow.
And it's pretty humbling when you're 45 years old and you're hanging a sheet over the door so that you have privacy to have your bedroom in your mother's house. And I'll never forget that. But anyway, we moved back to Montgomery, and after getting there, I went over to see my buddy that was the city prosecutor, and I laid out for him in detail, what was going on at USIS and how I discovered it and how I stopped it. And he said, it didn't take him just a few minutes to know that if this was a case that was to go forward, he was just a one-man law firm. It wouldn't be anything he could handle. So anyway, he made us an appointment at the largest law firm in Alabama. It's the Beasley Allen law firm in Montgomery, Alabama. And he took me over there. I think it was the very next day. And I met with the Beasley Allen attorneys, and it was kind of funny. I was sitting at a huge, boardroom table, and inside I am twisted. I am the most anxious I've ever been in my life. I mean,
Have they represented people like whistleblowers in the past? Why Beasley Allen? I know it was a recommendation.
Yes.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, they had represented whistleblowers in the past, and he took me over there, I think, because of the size of the firm, that they would know how to handle it. And so I'm sitting on one side of the table with my friend, the attorney I had initially called, and Beasley Allen's got a couple attorneys and a couple clerks across from us. And anyway, they asked me to tell them what was going on, and I started laying it out for them. And it probably took me about an hour to lay out everything, and I gave them, the copy of the severance package that they had offered me. And when I finished, I sat down, and one of the attorneys across from me, his name was Larry Golston, and he ended up being my attorney. He stood up and he said, "Mr. Percival, what you have just laid out is classic whistleblower retaliation." And he said, "But can you prove it?" And I stood back up, and as I pulled my flash drive from my pocket, I promise you could see spit coming out the sides of his mouth. He knew that I had relayed to him a horrible fraud that needed to be stopped. And if I had what I was indicating I had on that flash drive, he knew that we had the proof. So he began scrambling, and they brought in a computer and a screen, and I started putting spreadsheets up for them and showing them. And USIS had gotten so bold in their fraud that it was easy to show that the number of reviewers working in this facility could not physically process the number of investigations they were turning over to the government. It didn't take a smart person at all to prove it.
Right. I remember I'd read how staffers had sent a letter to the company in 2011 and asking how 4 investigators could complete 13,000 reports in 1 week. I mean, that's just a giveaway right there.
Yeah. And that's pretty bold on USIS's part. And I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier is at this point, they were so important to the government. They actually thought they were smarter than the government, and I got to give them credit on a lot of things. They were smarter than the government. But anyway, so after I explained it to Beasley Allen, they filed my case for me in the Middle District of Alabama. And the way a whistleblower case works, it's called a key tam case. And the way a key tam case is filed is it is initially filed in federal court, and when it's filed under seal so that nobody knows who's making the allegation. And at the same time you do that, you're required by law to brief the U.S. attorney in that district of what your allegation is. Well, that took place on July 1st of 2011. So from that point, moving forward in my story, every 60 or 90 days from that point, the Department of Justice would contact me through my attorney, and they would ask for a continuance so that they could continue to investigate my claim. And, I know that I was making a big claim. I know that I was bringing forward a major fraud. So the first time that, they did that, wasn't surprised. But as 60 to 90 days continued to happen for years, you begin to ask yourself, do they really want to expose this? And so this 60 to 90 days continued from July 1st of 2011 until the next thing that happened was in June of 2013. Edward Snowden left the United States, took national security secrets with him. And because of that, Congress started having hearings about the security clearance process. It's interesting also that at that same time in June of 2013, USIS was trying to privately settle the case with the Department of Justice. And they had actually worked out a deal with the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice was going to allow them to do what they call a hardship settlement. In other words, a lot less than they owed the U.S. government, but because of the financial status of the company, they were going to allow them to settle it. And again, that was in June of 2013, at the same time the Edward Snowden stuff happened. Well, because of the hearings they were having in Congress, a senator by the name of Claire McCaskill from Missouri was talking and, on the floor of Congress, and she asked the OPM Inspector General if he had any concerns that the background investigation on Edward Snowden was not done correctly. And when he answered her, he said that he did have concerns, and it was because the company that had done that investigation had been under investigation since 2011. And he was referring to my case. Well, as soon as he said that, USIS and the government could no longer privately settle it because the cat was out of the bag. Up until that point, my case was under seal. It would still remain under seal for a short time longer, but until that point, nobody officially knew that USIS was under investigation. But once they knew, the government couldn't allow them to privately settle it, and USIS, then had to worry about criminal prosecutions. So they were, no longer interested in settling. Well, again, that was June of 2013. Then in September of 2013, a guy by the name of Aaron Alexis went to the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., murdered 12 people, and then committed suicide.
You ever heard about him?
Guess who did his security clearance? So, again, it was my former employer, USIS. So because of that, more congressional hearings took place, and and I'm sitting there working multiple jobs, stocking shelves in a grocery store on midnight shift, doing investigative work for a competitor of USIS, and working for the city of Montgomery as a magistrate. And I'm sitting there going, I told the government about this on July 1st of 2011. So anyway, and keep in mind, up to this point, the government has not even agreed that there's anything to my claim. We know that they know, and we know that it can be proven, but they have not officially, they call it intervening in the case, and the government had not intervened. Well, in October of 2013, the government finally intervened in the case, and it changed. Up until that point, it was Blake Percival versus U.S. Investigation Services, and it changed at that point to be the United States of America, ex-rel Blake Percival versus U.S. Investigation Services. So at that point, my case was no longer under seal. My name came out in the news, and
were you doing interviews once it came out of the news?
I couldn't. Yeah, I was at that point. And that's one of the funny things to me about the whistleblower program that the U.S. government has, is once you blow the whistle, the only person you can talk to until the case is over is the government. So, and when I say the government, I mean the people in prosecution.
Right.
I never got called to Congress. They were having all these hearings about security clearances. And here you had a whistleblower that came forward July 1st of 2011. Like Percival never was called to Congress to go tell them what was going on. So I just find all that ironic about the whole thing. But so October they intervened. I think it was October 30th, and then by law they had 90 days to file their complaint against USIS. Well, they filed that in January of 2014. The Department of Justice filed it, and in that complaint, the Department of Justice said that the fraud known as dumping took place from at least 2008 until late 2012. And I, as an American citizen, still want to know why our government allowed it to continue when they had it handed to them on a silver platter on July 1st of 2011.
Makes you wonder where if they had their hands in if someone there out of their pockets, or had their pockets in mind,
Well, before we go further, to some degree they did, and here's how. So OPM is jokingly known within the government as other people's money. It stands for Office of Personnel Management, but it's one of the few federal agencies that has programs but receives their funding from other federal agencies, not from Congress. So Congress was shocked during this investigation when they were looking into all this that they really couldn't cut off the purse strings to OPM because they were getting paid by other federal agencies. So, for instance, the DEA wanted to hire somebody, and this person needed a security clearance. So the DEA would pay OPM, I don't know the exact amount, but we'll say for discussion purposes, $4,000. They then would pay USIS $3,500 to do the investigation, and they'd pocket $500.
I see.
So, we jokingly say, did the government have, a reason to let it go? Yeah, they absolutely did. Every count of fraud that USIS did, the Office of Personnel Management made money on. So, anyway, again, that's something that has still bothers me. And only in the Department of Justice filing in January 2014 did I find out how far back the fraud had gone. It had been going on since at least 2008, and again, they let it continue till late 2012.
Why do you think it finally stopped in 2012? Because of what you did, I'm assuming.
It did, yeah. In late 2012, the Department of Justice did come in and force USIS to let some people go. And these people lost their security clearances, and it was all the way up through senior management, including the CEO, gone from the company. And so anyway, the Department of Justice went on in that filing to say that USIS committed fraud during that time period on at least 665,000 background investigations. To date, nobody with the U.S. government will talk about what we do about that. If people really need security clearances, really need to be investigated, 665,000 people were not. What did we do about it? Did we back up and reinvestigate them? Did we even identify who they are, what job they hold, if their hands on the nuclear trigger? Nobody will answer that question.
After the break, I want to go in a little bit in depth about these security clearances, but anyways,
Sure.
Go ahead.
Sure. So, that, like I said, that to me, you would think would be a concern for, members of Congress and everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned two of the people that came out, during the whole debacle. But there was a third one, and it just came to light last year, and that was a guy by the name of Imran Awan. I was actually surprised by this one, but the FBI released that, his clearance was one of the ones pushed through when this 665,000 clearances were being pushed through based on fraud. He was working actually in Congress as an IT person, and was arrested at the airport attempting to flee to Pakistan. But anyway, my case ended up settling. They settled, the company settled with the U.S. government in August of 2015, and the government basically settled for pennies on the dollar because by that point they had canceled all of USIS's contracts, and USIS was in bankruptcy court, ended up going out of business, no longer exists. And then in December of 2015, the federal government awarded me 20%.
So they got out of it, because I know typically I had another whistleblower on here and he got a percentage
Yes.
of the amount that was defrauded, of the entire amount.
Yes, and that's the way that the whole KETAM program is set up. This is funny also. The KETAM whistleblower program has been around forever. It was actually set up during Abe Lincoln's administration. And it was because during the Civil War, our government was buying, cannons that didn't work. And so they set it up, and the way it works is the person that turns in someone defrauding our government is entitled to 10 to 30% of whatever the government's able to recover from them. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had no idea it went back that far.
Yeah. So, there's a long list of successful whistleblowers. So, from my story, it wasn't easy. I decided to take the high road. There were several other people that had sat in the same chair I sat in as the director there, that chose to do otherwise. And, I'm very thankful that instilled within me, I had the morals, the values, and the ethics to know and to be ready when I was called on to make that decision. It appears that I'll be known for this, and it was literally 2 minutes of my life. And I'm just very thankful that when I was called on to make that decision, I'd already decided what I believed, what was acceptable, and what was right and wrong. And, there's one other thing I would throw out, and it's when the facts are on your side and you're right, never back down, never quit, because you can't lose. So, I've been surprised by some of the reaction to my story. When you find yourself, I guess, in the limelight of a story like that, things come your way. And one of the opportunities that I've been given since this has happened is I'm actually now a member of a law firm in Washington, D.C. that specializes in whistleblower cases. So,
are you allowed to tell the audience what that agency is?
Absolutely. I didn't know if you would allow me to, but
you absolutely are allowed to speak. They have some clever terminology to protect you for the station.
It's Protect Us Law, and you can find out more about it at www.protectuslaw.com. But it's Protect Us Law. If you can reach me at bpercival@protectuslaw.com or at 202-810-1300. extension 514. And it's interesting. This law firm was actually founded by a whistleblower. We call ourselves the Whistleblower Law Firm. And the gentleman that founded it is a guy by the name of John Harold, and he's actually been a whistleblower twice.
Hold that thought. We'll be back with Blake Percival after these station messages.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio! You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Well, welcome back to Whistleblower Nation. I'm here with Blake Percival. Okay, Blake, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay. Well, so I think I was at the point of talking about John Harold. John actually founded Protect Us Law, the law firm that I'm now a member at. And it's interesting. He actually has been a successful whistleblower himself twice, which is unusual. And the entire law firm, the members of the law firm are former whistleblowers, and that's why we call ourselves the whistleblower firm. And who better to help someone through such a difficult time as being a whistleblower than another
Right.
whistleblower. So that's it. And if anybody out there wants to discuss a situation that they think makes them a whistleblower, I'd be more than happy to talk to them. And because I am a member of this Washington, D.C. law firm, I can offer them attorney-client privilege when we talk.
Great. Well, that'll be helpful because, I talk to whistleblowers every day, and some people ask, do you know of a good lawyer, but you do need evidence, because a lot of people have
Absolutely.
situations that may not necessarily be something you can win in court. So I know that's the tricky part. Evidence is everything.
It absolutely is. And, this whole KETAM program that was set up by Abe Lincoln's administration was set up the way it was to where that it puts a financial incentive out there for people that would report the illegal fraudulent activity. And it also then gets them the help they need because it provides a financial way for them to get the help. So
I see. So do you mind sharing how much your settlement was? You don't have to. Just curious.
No, my wife tells me I share too much at times, but when they print it on the front page of the Washington Post, it's really not a secret. So it's settled for a little over $30 million. They gave me 20%, so I got about $6 million.
Good for you. I know. I can imagine when it first happened and you were losing your job and you're basically living in your mom's house and making money like that, you're probably regretting whistleblowing. But in the end, not just you feel good about yourself and you have the integrity. In your case, in some other cases, you actually can get some monetary benefits out of it. And I'm just so happy for you. I'm so glad you were able to acquire some of that. And I think people deserve it. And thank you, Abe Lincoln.
That's right. Thank you, Ella. I appreciate that and your kind words. And this company took my chosen profession from me, and I was pretty much blackballed within the national security background investigations field. And so to walk away from it with what I walked away with. Kind of made some of that right, at least from the financial standpoint.
Yeah, that's good. So are you doing anything else with your life right now? Any kind of projects or anything like that?
I do a lot of volunteer work. I do a lot of speaking. I like to talk about ethics and morals. And, people, at least I was naive up until this kind of happened in my life, that everybody kind of had the same morals and values and ethics, and we don't. And that, is something that until you have it thrown in your face, a lot of people don't recognize. So I enjoy sharing my story and talking about, making ethical decisions or making making decisions based on your ethics. I also just completed a book. I wrote a book about my story, and I've put it in the hands of someone that's, shopping it now for a book deal. So hopefully,
any publishers out there, pick them up, give them a call, email them.
I tell you what, there's not a lot of stories that will throw out the unknown stuff behind the scenes within our government and stuff that my story has. So.
Well, I know someone maybe, after the interview, there's somebody, maybe I can make an introduction. He had some success with a book that's very similar. So, it's
Awesome.
worth following, trying to follow up on that. I
Awesome.
want to go back a little bit. You had mentioned, that people were definitely aware of this up to, the senior staff. Why wasn't anybody else blowing the whistle? The woman who came into your office and she was telling you about dumping, it was the first time you even heard of it.
Mhm.
Why didn't she do it? Why weren't people standing up? Why were you the first person?
You know, I've asked myself that numerous times. Um, in trying to figure out not just why they didn't blow the whistle, but why they felt it was okay to do this, it appeared to me that they rationalized it because someone above them in the company told them to do it. So they kind of, you know how humankind kind of looks for a way to rationalize things when it's not right. But some people, well, everybody.
Yep, they try to
When
make
you've done,
justifications.
yeah, you try to make justification, and that's what they came up with, and was that I'm doing it, but I'm only doing it because I got to feed my family and I got to get my paycheck, and somebody above me is the one that made the decision and told me to do this.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. But still, it's kind of shocking when so
It
many
is.
people were,
And that takes me
privy to
back to
this.
what I was saying earlier, is that, until that point in my life, I mean, I knew people thought differently about different aspects of right and wrong, but until that point in my life, I didn't realize how far off track some people's thinking is as to what's right and what's wrong.
Right. I mean, it's just a world, I do this so often and I talk to so many people where there's so many injustices in the world. And, a lot of it just comes down to money, just
Yeah,
plain old money,
it
and
it truly is the root to all evil.
it is. And I say that every day, in fear, people are in fear.
Yeah,
What's going to happen to me? People are scared, fear of the
yeah.
unknown. What is this organization, this person going to do to me? Did you ever feel, it doesn't sound like, at least when you told the story, did you have any kind of fear that they might hurt you? Had you heard that they do these type of things? Did you have any concerns for your
I
family?
did. Yeah, I did. I mentioned that my lawyer told me to protect my family and
Yes, you
get them
did.
out of there.
Hmm.
And there was a time when I know for a fact they were surveilling me. Quick story: I was during this time that I was unemployed and trying to figure out what I was going to do right after I lost my job. And we're living at my mother's house, and my mother was elderly. Her bushes were way overgrown, and so I thought, my mind is tormented with the everything that's going on. It'll do me good to do some physical work. So I went out front in her yard and I was trimming her bushes, and I noticed I was at a T intersection, and I'm a former police officer. I'm
You've
former
got those
military.
skills. Yeah.
Yeah, and I immediately noticed a black SUV with all black windows, including the driver's side window, parked at this T intersection where there's no house. There's just a row of shrubs. And so there was no reason for a vehicle to be parked there. I noticed it as soon as I went out there, and I just kind of kept watching it. It was behind me, so I would kind of watch it over my shoulder as I was, cutting off pieces of the bush. And my wife and my mom came out front to see what I was doing. And they did what people always do when you say, "Hey, I want to tell you something, but don't look." They both looked over at the vehicle, and as they did, the vehicle cranks up, and you can see somebody moving around in the front seat. I had actually seen the guy crawl from the back into the front, and cranked up the vehicle and drove off. And I know for a fact that that they were watching me then. Then also, when you bring something major like this to the government watches you because they need to know what kind of witness you are.
Right.
So
You become a target of the government and they're watching your every
yeah,
move. You're like on
yeah.
some list to be watched at that point, almost like you're a terrorist almost.
Well, exactly. You feel like everybody's watching you, and to some extent they are. And and another part of it for us that was really weird was, I had moved up and moved up and moved up, and the last place I had worked in Montgomery, Alabama, was at the Montgomery Police Department. And we left town with me moving up, we doing federal investigations, and then we come back to town, and it's because I lost my job, and I can't tell anybody why I lost my job. So that's, insult to injury.
Right. And how was your family? Your extended family and friends. I guess you couldn't tell them.
You're absolutely
wow.
right. You kind of just, and that's back to kind of what I was telling you earlier is, you notice that, when I left Montgomery, Alabama, and the whole time that I was away, I was a bigwig. And when I came back to town, I wined and dined people, and people wanted to see me, and people, called me for my opinion about stuff. And then when I came back unemployed, it was hard to reach people.
Yeah, I imagine so. I can imagine so. Let's see. I had quite a few other questions. I guess how long? And you might have mentioned it. I think you said the years. So it took like 4 years before the case was settled. Is that correct?
4.5.
Okay.
It was filed July 1st of 2011, and it actually settled in August of 2015. But then they weren't done with me until December of 2015.
Okay. Well,
that was weird. Also, this is kind of funny. So they wrote me this huge check and sent it to me, and the lawyers gave me the check, and I went across town to their to the law firm's bank, and walked in with this multi-million-dollar check and tried to give it to the teller, and I was going there to open up an account, but I walked in with the check, handed it to the teller, and she was like, "Hang on just a second." She brought out the president of the bank, and he said, "Mr. Percival, what do you want to do? Because we can't exactly cash this." And I said, "Well, I was hoping to get it in 20s."
Aw.
But
I'm sure they were quite. They thought it was extraordinary. So after the fact, though, you can disclose kind of what happened, obviously. And are you still under some what's the word I'm looking for? I should know it.
Like a non-disclosure.
Non-disclosure. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, had the case settled in 2013 when they were trying to settle it privately, I would have had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. But because of the way it settled, them being in bankruptcy court, they were unable to ask me for anything. So the case settled, and I can freely talk about whatever I want to. I will tell you that all the attorneys told me, just shut your mouth and go away. In America today, anytime you open your mouth, there are people out to get you.
That seems to be the case.
Yeah. So, but I've never done anything but tell the truth in this story, and I'm going to keep doing it. And that to me is, one of the satisfactions that I get is there are people out there that participated in this fraud, led this fraud, came up with this fraud, and our government never charged anybody criminally. Nobody went to jail over this. They paid pennies on the dollar. I told you they settled for $30 million. The Wall Street Journal did an article about this case, and they said that if the government fully prosecuted it, this company owed our government $7.6 billion.
And nobody went to jail?
Nobody went to jail.
Wow.
And, I take that back to, I think the government did everything they could in this instance to just make this case go away. It was embarrassing for them. And, they in the end had to investigate themselves basically and say that they had let 665,000 people have security clearances without being investigated.
Well, I have another question for you. Do you believe dumping still occurs?
I cannot answer that because I'm out of the game, but I can tell you this: they have not removed the motivator. They still use private companies to do background investigations, and currently the Office of Personnel Management is still over background investigations and still gets a cut of the pie every time that a federal agency needs. So that money motivator is still there. In response to my case, they did create a new federal agency, and it is called the NBIB, National Background Investigations Bureau. It took the place of the Office of Federal Investigation. It still falls under the Office of Personnel Management, but in the near future, it'll be moved to fall under the Department of Defense. I think that is a very good move. One thing that I would also like them to change, though, is they still have contractors doing these security clearances. I worked with them. I was them. It's good people, but aren't there some things that the government should do for themselves?
I agree. So many of the problems these days, in my own opinion, in my investigations, is because it's all these companies are contracted, and there's no oversight. I really believe that.
And they tell us that the people checking our luggage at the airport need to be federal employees, and they are now. But yet the people that investigate them to give them a security clearance are not federal employees. That doesn't wash.
Yeah. Well, to go back to my previous question, I mean, you kind of already stated it. Are there any additional protections that, in your opinion, could be put in place to prevent the chance for profit scheme?
Absolutely. You
kind of answered it, but I'm sure
the next logical step to removing it is moving it out from under the Office of Personnel Management. And then, isn't it just a glorious Ponzi scheme to have federal agencies individually paying another federal agency to do their background investigations? Why not just fund that agency properly, provide them with enough investigators where they don't have to have contractors, and then you've cut it. Every time you have a layer of I guess, bureaucracy in a situation like that, you provide a place in the process for fraud. And so, if you bring in private companies, they're going to try to make as much as they can. And if you have, of course, a federal agency that gets a cut of the pie, there's another wrinkle. So,
right.
They need to have funding for the agency to do the background investigations, and they need to have federal employees doing them.
Right. What would you have done differently if you could go back, if anything?
As far as the blowing the whistle part, I think I did it as best I could, and I think it came out with, a great outcome. I often, when I'm sharing my story, point out to everybody that in January of 2011, when they called me and offered me this position, it was a great thing. It was what me and my family had bet on the entire time I was moving up with this company, was to make it to the director level. It came with stock options, and it was a great promotion. It was a night that we celebrated. It was, we had no idea the road we would have to go down. And I'm a man of faith. I actually had prayed at that point. What do I do? Not that there, from my mind, was much decision to be made. I mean, you were having the world laid at your feet for this promotion. I am very glad that I didn't know the road I would have to walk down now. Had I known in January of 2011 what would transpire over the next few months, I'm not sure I could have done it. And I've had a lot of people tell me, I'm not sure I could have done what you did.
Right.
And that's where I come back to, we have to decide what's right and wrong for us and what we believe so that we're ready to act on it when it's time. Because when I had to act on it, I did it really without thinking. It was just the right thing to do.
Right. And everything else just kind of played out its course.
Exactly.
Okay, well, one thing I did want to go back and discuss with you, because I find it so concerning and alarming how many people have security clearances. I'd like to hear, what they're supposed to go through. I mean, maybe a little more detail. I'm very curious about this because it seems like everybody's got one. And I find that so concerning. Even private investigators, that have, retired military and things like that. And how long do they last? How long, if you get a security clearance, how long does that go for? How long is it in effect?
I'll try to talk about some of that. Okay, so there's different levels of clearances. Okay, the highest one is top secret. And based on the level of clearance that someone needs, it determines what kind of investigation is done in order to grant it. If they just need to be cleared to work for the federal government, there's just electronic checks that are run. They check with the FBI to see if any fingerprint cards have ever been filed. It's a real cursory type of background investigation. It's basically an electronic background investigation. But then as you move up the chain for the various levels of clearances, when you get to top secret, a top secret clearance is pretty in depth. All the stuff that took place, for the electronic checks, all those are done. Okay, so immigration naturalization records are checked, state databases are checked, the FBI is checked. Every computer system there is out there is checked. In addition to that, your background is investigated based on a form that you fill out. That's one thing a lot of people don't realize unless they've ever gone through it. You have to actually request that the government investigate your background and give them permission to do it. And you fill out a form called an SF-86. And it's changed a little bit in the last few years, but I think it's about a 12-page form. And you fill out all of your relatives' information, where you've lived, worked, gone to school, covering the last 10 years of your life, and then your education history back to covering your highest degree and any that took place in the last 10 years. All those places that you filled out, somebody's physically going to go to. And when they go to, for instance, you've listed where you've lived, okay? For the different levels of clearances, it dictates how far back in your history they're physically going to go to. And they're going to go to your current residence. And if you own the home, they're going to go to your neighbors, and they're going to talk to your neighbors, and they're going to do probably about a 15, 20-minute interview with at least two neighbors that live in close proximity to where you live. If you rent the home, they're going to talk to your landlord, and they're going to get a copy of your rental record, showing that you pay your rent and whether you're on time. They're going to go to your local law enforcement, and they're going to run through your pertinent information, name, date of birth, place of birth, social security number, see if there's any hits on any of that. They're going to check to see if the police have ever been out to your address. They're going to go to your school that you claim you went to for your highest degree. They're going to get, make sure you did graduate. They're going to check with the dean of students for any disciplinary action. It's in depth. They're going to go to your current employer. They're going to go to your previous employers. It's changed over time, but I believe it's for the last 5 years. They talk to your previous employers. They're going to ask to see your employment record, and then they're going to go through it and look for any counselings, any wage garnishments, any things that could raise flags, and they're going to compare that information to what you told the U.S. government on the form that you filled out. And if they can determine that you didn't disclose something, or you lied, that's a serious problem. You're asking to see our country's national security secrets, but you don't tell the truth on your application.
Right.
So
do they let some slide if somebody had some small something on their police record, if there were kids or something, like 19-year-old driving drunk or something stupid,
Yeah,
which
so
is very dangerous. But
oh yes, there is. I'm trying to think about how to describe it. So problems in your background are called issues. And these different issues are given a letter grade based on their severity. Okay. So there's issues, and I think it's 1 through 14. And, number 2 is alcohol. And each different type of issue has a number designation. And then the severity of it is from A through D. And, if you had an alcohol issue within the last year, and it's a serious alcohol issue, I mean, not a minor in possession type thing, then it would be an O2D, excuse me. And as the years progress, it's downgraded. So it might always follow you, because anytime somebody's had an issue with a controlled substance or alcohol, it potentially could cause them issues in the future.
Of course.
But as the time passes from when that is, it's taken less seriously by the government. And it's the same thing with criminal offenses. Criminal offenses might always have to be admitted, because on that form, the questions are phrased in different ways. One of them is, depending on the level of clearance, one of them will ask, have you used marijuana in the last year? Whereas a different level of clearance will say, have you used marijuana ever? And then if they find where you may, this is where a lot of people mess up, is they again rationalize within themselves that their lawyer told them, I don't have to admit this because I was 17, and maybe it was a drug offense, and then they fill out this federal form and it says, have you ever been arrested for a drug offense? And if they put no, and then the government finds that legal record, that's a big problem.
So got to be squeaky clean there. So that's the top secret clearances.
Yes, and then they're less, I guess, intrusive. There's top secret, there's secret, and there's confidential, and then even less than that is not really having a clearance, but you have to be cleared to be in the facility or work for the government.
Did you know how many top secret clearances are? I mean, we have a rough idea, I know, for the security clearances, but do you know, approximately how many top secret clearances?
Yeah, no, I couldn't even begin to guess, but it's in the millions. It's and that's one of the things Congress keyed on, is why do we have this many people that are cleared to the top secret level?
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. You're wondering, is this, all military industrial complex stuff? You just wonder why there's so many. I've talked to many people, or actually a handful of people who've told me how many clearances, and I'm always curious your opinion versus someone else's opinion, but it seems like far too many people, with these clearances.
It definitely isn't. And one other thing you asked was how long they're good for.
Yes. That's
another thing, is the value of a clearance. Once you have a clearance, it's good for 7 years, and they update them every 5 years, and it's called a periodic reinvestigation. So you get your clearance. It's good for 5 years, and then it's good for 7 years, and then every 5 years they update it. These people working in the military industrial complex, like you mentioned, if you've ever seen postings for these companies that do business with our government, a whole lot of them will say in the requirements, you must have a security clearance. And that's why, because it takes a while to get one. And once you get one, it's good for, years. Not to mention they don't want to spend the money to get your investigation done because they have to pay for it, just like, federal agencies would have to pay for. And they certainly don't want to hire someone, spend the money on an investigation, and then the person not pass it. So there's a lot of value in a person that holds a clearance.
Yeah, I see that. Okay, so that's fascinating. I was just, because that's what you did, I knew you'd have some good information to share with people. So, and I'm sure, maybe you do know or don't know, over the years, how many more? Like I was trying to figure out, in the 90s versus after the Patriot Act was instilled, the amount of security clearances. I mean, they must have just gone through the roof at that point.
I don't know any facts, but I can tell you this. I can tell you that I worked for this company from January of 2001 until January 2011. And after September 11th, 2001, this company, just like all other federal contractors and the federal government, just ballooned. When I was hired in January of 2001, there were 720-ish investigators with this company. And I don't know, maybe 1,500 employees for the whole company. And when my incident happened in 2011, there were about 2,500 investigators and about 10,000 employees at this company.
Okay.
I remember shortly after 9/11, the Department of Defense transferred over to USIS 200,000 background investigations that needed to be done all at once.
Wow. Yeah, I knew it was something fairly excessive, so that's very interesting. Yeah. And so I guess I want to jump back to whistleblowers in general. What I always ask whistleblowers is, what advice do you have for them? And then maybe if we can get a little bit of a discussion, we have, about 20 minutes left, what we can do to protect them and, just some advice maybe and how to approach the topic and what they can do to protect themselves. Those would be great to hear your answers.
Sure. I'll try.
Okay.
People, I think there's a misconception about whistleblowers. You hear it thrown out all the time on the TV that there's all kinds of whistleblower laws to protect whistleblowers, and there are. But let's face it, if somebody's going to break the law, and do something illegal involving our federal government, they're probably not going to let you keep working there. They're probably going to go ahead and break the whistleblower laws as well.
Right.
So the most important thing, I guess, that I would like to relay to people is you got to be able to lay your head down at night and know that you did the right thing. At least I do. And it's not easy. It's not something that I would advise anybody to get into for the money. It's a tough decision. It's something that you got to weigh out, and you got to know that you can prove it. People come forward to the government all the time with allegations. You have to be able to prove what you're alleging, and if you can't prove it, weigh that out too in what you do and what actions you take. It's once you become a whistleblower, I know myself, you're treated differently. Even after I was fired by USIS, I was blackballed within the industry that until June of 2011, I was the person called on for information about how we do these background investigations. And suddenly, I can't get people to call me back for a job just doing the investigations. So it's not something to take lightly. And I guess that would be my main advice is just, if you're going to make an allegation, make sure that you can prove it. If you're weighing it out and you don't know what to do, I would absolutely advise you to get advice. I hear about whistleblowers all the time. Some of them do it the right way, and some of them do it the non-legal way. My advice would be seek legal advice. Talk to someone that can help you, but more importantly, someone that can listen to what you have to say, give you feedback, and then can't talk about what you said.
Okay. All right. Have you had a chance to meet any other whistleblowers? Anybody that you admire or respect?
I've like I said, I've chatted with the people within our law firm. That are other whistleblowers. I've had a few contact me on social media, but I think I've also found that most whistleblowers kind of stay to themselves.
Yeah, they do, unless they've done some kind of disclosure together. I noticed,
Yes.
in the 90s, there was, a group of guys. I'm sure I always bring them up because I just think of the world of them. But Bill Binney and Kirk Wiebe and Diane Rourke, and there's numerous other ones as well at that same era. So I know they do things together and they go to conferences and, but I don't think they had any financial gain. I think they're still trying to fight to get certain things back that the government kind of had taken in the course of the whistleblowing. So
Yeah.
Okay, and then I don't know, the government. What do you think about the government these days? If you feel comfortable talking about your opinion.
Well,
it's the same topic. We actually have a lot of Republicans that listen to us, but we got some liberals too. I'm in the middle.
Either way, and here's one thing that shocked me in all this. I guess maybe I was naive, but it really shocked me that my issue that I blew the whistle on, it should not matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. We're talking about national security. We're talking about a threat to who gets to see secrets within our government. And I know there's people that believe we shouldn't have any secrets, but let's face it, we live in a wonderful country that is targeted by other countries. And if they know our secrets, it makes them it gives them the ability to hurt us.
Right.
And so, I just, I was shocked at, well, there was an incident when I could not talk, during the 4.5 years that I could not talk, when they would be talking about my case on C-SPAN. I'd never watched C-SPAN before in my life, but I decided to start watching when they would have the hearings on security clearances and stuff, because they would talk about my case. Now, they didn't know who I was until after the hearings in June of 2013. And when my name came out during that, there was a particular congressman. I'm working 3 jobs. I'm struggling. I know what I've gone through. And this particular congressman throws out that he didn't think I deserved anything as a whistleblower, because the Office of Personnel Management would have figured this out themselves. And, to this day, I've tried to figure out why he would say that, why he would, dash my hopes of winning against the in my opinion, evil that I was up against. I've never figured out what his motivations were, and I always just wanted to look him in the eye and say, you could have just said thank you. You wouldn't have known about it if it hadn't been for me.
That's what I was just thinking when you were sharing. Like, well, they probably would have not known about it, if you hadn't done it. So, pretty simple. What about our president? Do you want to give any opinions about that and, share? Because it is shifting. The government's kind of getting shooken up a little bit. So I'm just curious.
It is. I know there's strong feelings both ways on our current administration. And, I just, you know, I try to look at the actions of political people and judge them by their actions rather than whether they have an R or a D behind their name. Because, you know, when the U.S. government gave me a gun and sent me overseas, they didn't put an R or a D on my shoulder. And I've always thought back to that and how I didn't have a say then in what I was being told to do. And now everything in Washington, D.C. seems to come down to whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. And I'm sorry, but that's just not right. It's not. The founders of this country would not be happy with the state of affairs today.
Oh, I'm sure. I agree with that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so we have like 10 more minutes or so. So whatever you want to talk about, you just, I'll give you the floor. Is there anything else you want to cover? I know there's some other things as well.
Well, I will just throw out that, I've done a good bit of sharing my story and talking to religious organizations, to civic organizations. It was kind of fun for me, having been in law enforcement. I was invited back to the West Virginia State Police Academy, and I got to go there and talk in the ethics training for people that were going through training to be police officers in West Virginia. And that was, really nice for me, neat for me. But more importantly, in our society, we get told all the time, or we get taught all the time, topics from people who have learned those topics, but they haven't been through things. And so, somebody like myself that has actually been through an ethical dilemma, I think is a great person to share how they made that ethical decision, what it was like to make that ethical decision, what it was like to live through the aftermath of making that decision. And so I enjoy traveling around and talking when I'm invited to about that, engaging people and just helping people realize a couple things. One, that not everybody has the same ethics. We throw out the word ethics all the time, but, let's face it, the ethics in the world today are not the same as they were for our grandparents. And
it'd be nice to bring them back, I tell you.
I would love it. I would love one more ride in my 50s. Grandpa's truck.
Minus the racism, I'd like to be back in the 50s.
Yep.
Wouldn't bother me one bit. Simpler time, that's for sure.
Yep. Yeah.
So what about this collusion, all this investigation going on with the Russian collusion, potentially? Do you have any opinions on that?
Well, again, I don't care which way the investigation goes. I do think that the truth needs to come out. And, I think it needs to come out sooner rather than later. I think that it really frustrates me to watch people arguing back and forth on Twitter and Facebook and in Washington, D.C. and Congress, all just based on whether it's Republican or whether it's Democrat. That should not matter if we're talking about a foreign government influencing, our election. And it just, again, our founders would be rolling over in their graves.
Yeah, much agreed. So what plans do you have in the future? Like, I know what you're doing right now. You mentioned that. So long-term goals, what do you have in mind?
Well, I hope
this book, I know.
Yeah. What I've done with the book so far is I turned it over to an entertainment attorney, and he's supposed to be shopping it for a book deal. I would really like to have the book lead to more, talking about ethics, morals, values. Another thing, I don't think I mentioned this. Shortly after my case settled, like I said, I was never invited to Washington, D.C. So shortly after my case settled, I went to Washington, D.C. on my own dime, and I went to the Congress members that work, that from my area, and a senator that is key in the security clearance realm. He kind of sponsors any bills to do with security clearances. And I went to them and I gave them my 2 cents. And I also posed to them the questions that I posed earlier. What did we do about these 665,000 people? And what changes are we going to make? And I didn't get any answers then. And to date, none of them have contacted me back and offered, any updates that they were able to find anything out, because quite frankly, I think they gave me face service and then went on about their way. I mentioned the new agency that they created, the National Background Investigations Bureau.
Right.
I would love to be involved in that. You tell me who's more qualified to come in and make sure we do things right than somebody that laid everything on the line and let it be taken away from them to make sure we did everything right. So they set up this new agency. It's still, in the transfer phases, and they have a board that advises on this agency. And when I went to Washington, D.C., I asked that I be nominated to be on that board. And, that again, nothing has happened to that, but I would love to get involved in that, just because you can't tell me that there's somebody out there more qualified.
Nope, it doesn't sound like it, not at all. I think you should be able to do that, definitely. So what about conferences? Do you consider any being a part of? Because we're actually having a whistleblower conference in Los Angeles. Me, John Bolenbaugh, and a gentleman named V. Would you consider maybe coming on that? Not to put you on the spot. You don't have to answer now, but would you consider it?
Yeah, absolutely. To date, I have not turned down anything. I just, you hear a lot of bad news these days. You hear when somebody gets beat down and they don't get back up. You don't hear a lot of doing the right thing and winning. And I kind of made up my mind after this happened that I would outlive the guys that did this to me, and I would tell my story so that they had to hear it over and over and over. That is my long-term goal.
Right.
So yes, I would absolutely love to be involved in anything.
Okay. We're trying to have one of the biggest whistleblower conferences ever held, and crossing our fingers, we're going to have some people from the Me Too movement. It's going to be very broad. Yeah, it's going to be, and government's a big part of it as well, and some experimentation issues, and all kinds that we got it across the board, and then vaccines, trying to find someone for vaccines, and
awesome.
This we're looking forward to. We're just kind of pulling it all together. It's going to be in November.
Well, I would love to be involved.
Okay, well, thank you. I really appreciate it. So, let me see. What about, I don't know. I guess I was curious, what can be done? I'm really disturbed. One thing that you pointed out that I hadn't really thought about is that these people, no one served time, nobody was prosecuted. So I'm just curious, what can they do to make sure that happens? It's like no one ever had to take responsibility.
We saw it on Wall Street. Yeah, we saw it on Wall Street a few years ago. And you mentioned the military-industrial complex. That's doing, having that is doing nothing more than bringing Wall Street into the operations of our government. And like I mentioned, with the changing of hands for this company who actually owned it, it brought in that motivator of fraud, and it's all about the money. I'll share this. When 9/11 happened, this company had already been sold. It was, about a year after 9/11, this company was sold, and the major investor, it was a private equity firm that bought, I think 60% of the company at that point was Carlyle Group. Are you familiar with them?
Oh, I am actually. I don't really know much about them. So
well, at that point, one of the major investors in Carlyle Group was the bin Laden family. So here you have the premier provider of background investigations for the federal government, and they're 60% owned by the Carlyle Group, which is partially owned by the bin Laden family. Just an ironic twist. So then, a few years later, the company sold again, and it sold to a company or a private equity firm called Welsh Carson. And then when it sold the next time, it sold to the largest private equity firm in the world, Providence Equity Partners. And at the time that my whistleblowing took place, Providence Equity Partners had $100 billion in play in various investments. And yet the government settled with USIS for $30 million.
Yeah, unbelievable. That is interesting, though. That what you just told me, that's very interesting about the Carlyle Group. Yeah.
Here's another tidbit. During June of 2013, when they were trying to settle with me privately, at that same time, the former CEO of USIS was nominated by Loretta Lynch for a position overseeing the HSBC money laundering settlement with the U.S. government, and he got it. So he had led the company of USIS from 2008 till sometime in 2011. Remember, the fraud took place from 2008 to 2012. And our federal government gets him a job, and I'm stuck stocking shelves.
Unbelievable. Really, truly. We just somehow we gotta, I talked to another whistleblower. He's like, we just need a new government. Just clear it all out. We're starting from scratch. We're going back to the way it was,
Yeah. Good people have to speak up. That's
yes,
for sure.
They do. Absolutely. So we have like another minute. So why don't you go back and tell us a little bit, what you're doing, websites, your book, and I understand your book's not published yet, but yeah, let's review a little bit about what you're doing.
Sure. If you would, just if you're listening out there and you would just keep the name Blake Percival in your mind, and I was the USIS whistleblower. If you want to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter at Persigator. But like I said, I'm involved in a law firm now. It's Protect Us Law, also called Protect US Law, but it's protectuslaw.com.
Well, thank you, Blake.
You're
well,
welcome.
It sounds like we're going on out. I just want to say thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this interview. And don't forget to donate to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We got to keep these stations alive. Thank you very much, and signing out now.